I'm Marissa, 32, and for my entire life, I've walked on eggshells around my mother. Her criticism, her judgment, her impossible standards, they've shaped me in ways I'm still unpacking in therapy. But last month at my cousin's wedding, when she screamed, "My life is cursed to have birthed you," in front of our entire family, something inside me finally broke. My response left the room in shocked silence and changed everything. Sometimes standing up for yourself costs everything but saves your soul. Before I dive into what happened, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to a toxic family member. Have you had to set boundaries with someone who is supposed to love you unconditionally? Share below. You're not alone. Growing up in Portland with my mother Diane and father Robert was like living under a microscope, where every flaw was magnified and every achievement diminished. Our house was pristine, not a comfortable home, but a showcase where everything, including me, had to be perfect. This was my normal for 18 years. "Your handwriting could be neater," she'd say when I showed her my school awards. "That A- in chemistry. What happened to the other 5 points?" Nothing was ever good enough. I remember bringing home a report card with straight A's in 7th grade, only to have her point out that Jennifer Miller's daughter had not only gotten straight A's, but also won the science fair that year. "Why can't you apply yourself like that?" she asked, completely dismissing my hard work. I spent that night crying into my pillow, wondering what I needed to do to make her proud. My appearance was another constant battlefield. By 13, I was already counting calories and anxious about my perfectly normal body. "Those jeans make your thighs look huge," she'd observe casually while I got ready for school. "Maybe skip breakfast today." When I made the volleyball team sophomore year, she remarked that the uniform shorts were unflattering on my body type, rather than congratulating me. Dad was physically present, but emotionally absent. He'd hide behind his newspaper when Mom started her criticism, occasionally offering a weak, "Diane, she's just a kid," before retreating back into silence when she turned her sharp tongue on him. I learned early that he wouldn't protect me. "Your father's too soft," she would tell me when he wasn't around. "That's why he never made partner at his firm. No backbone." The message was clear. Standing up for yourself or others was a weakness, not a strength. School became my sanctuary. I threw myself into academics and extracurriculars, partly to escape the tension at home, and partly in the desperate hope that eventually I'd achieve something that would finally make my mother proud. I joined debate team student government, volunteered at the local animal shelter, maintained a 4.0 GPA. And still, it wasn't enough. When I won a regional essay contest in 11th grade, Mom's first response was, "They must not have had many good entries this year." I remember the physical pain of those words like a punch to the stomach. The certificate went into a drawer instead of on the fridge. My excitement deflated completely. The contrast between how she acted in private versus public was jarring. At parent-teacher conferences, she was charming and engaged, bragging about how hard we work on Marissa's education at home. Teachers would tell me how lucky I was to have such a devoted mother. If only they knew that the same woman had called me academically lazy the night before because I'd taken a 10-minute break from studying. By my senior year of high school, I had developed debilitating anxiety, complete with panic attacks before family gatherings and a constant fear of failure. I became a consummate people pleaser, reading the room and adjusting my behavior to avoid criticism. With friends, I was the peacemaker, the one who never expressed negative emotions or disagreed openly. Conflict of any kind made my heart race. "You're too sensitive," became my mother's mantra whenever I teared up at her cutting remarks. "The real world will eat you alive if you don't toughen up." The irony that she was the one breaking me down was completely lost on her. College applications were entirely dictated by her preferences. She wanted prestigious universities only, regardless of whether they were a good fit for my interests. When acceptance letters came in, she dismissed my excitement about UCLA. "It's not Harvard," she sniffed, though she paraded the acceptance around to her friends as if it had been her first choice all along. In my senior year, I secretly started seeing the school counselor during lunch periods. Miss Ramirez was the first adult who validated that my home situation wasn't normal. "What you're describing sounds like emotional abuse, Marissa," she said gently during one of our sessions. The words hit me like a thunderbolt. Abuse. But my mother didn't hit me. We lived in a nice house. I had everything I needed materially. When I gathered the courage to mention therapy to my mother, suggesting maybe we could go together to work on our communication, her reaction was explosive. "Therapy is for weak people who can't handle their problems," she spat. "Did you tell some stranger I'm a bad mother? After everything I've sacrificed for you." The guilt trip lasted for weeks with pointed comments about ungrateful children and, "After all I've done for you." Despite this, a small seed had been planted. Maybe the problem wasn't that I wasn't good enough. Maybe the problem was that nothing would ever be good enough for Diane. This tiny revelation was the first crack in the foundation of my mother's control, though it would be years before I fully broke free. The most confusing part was that despite everything, I still desperately wanted her approval. Every achievement, every milestone, a part of me still hoped this would be the time she'd simply say, "I'm proud of you," without a qualification or criticism attached. That hope, repeatedly crushed, but somehow never completely extinguished, kept me trapped in the cycle of trying to please someone who couldn't be pleased. I left for UCLA with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. 3 states away from my mother's daily criticism felt like both a betrayal and a rescue. The day my parents dropped me off at the dorm, my mother's parting words were, "Don't embarrass us." Not, "I love you," or "I'll miss you," or "I'm proud of you." Just another warning not to fail. As Dad hugged me goodbye, he whispered, "She does love you in her way." At the time, I thought this was comforting. Later, I would recognize it as part of the problem, excusing emotional abuse as just another form of love. My first semester at UCLA felt like learning to breathe again. 3,000 miles from Portland meant 3,000 miles from my mother's constant criticism. My roommate Jenna was loud and messy and wonderful. Everything my mother would have disapproved of. And she became my first real friend. "You apologize a lot," she observed casually, about 2 weeks into our friendship. "Like for existing. It's weird." I hadn't even noticed this habit, saying sorry when someone bumped into me, apologizing before asking a question in class, even saying sorry when asking Jenna to turn down her music at 2 a.m. It was just one of many survival mechanisms I'd developed growing up with Diane. College academics were challenging, but exhilarating. Without my mother's voice in my ear telling me I wasn't good enough, I discovered I actually loved learning for its own sake. I joined the campus newspaper, made friends with people from different backgrounds, and for the first time started forming opinions that weren't carefully calibrated to match my mother's. The panic attacks didn't disappear overnight, but they became less frequent. I started seeing a therapist at the Student Health Center, Dr. Kamala, who helped me understand the concept of boundaries, something that simply didn't exist in my relationship with my mother. "You're an adult now," Dr. Kamala reminded me during our sessions. "You get to decide how much access your mother has to your life." This was a revolutionary concept. I'd never considered that I could limit our interactions or end a phone call when she became critical. The first time I tried it, telling her I needed to go study when she started criticizing my choice of major, I was shaking so badly I had to sit down afterward. "She'll get over it," Dr. Kamala assured me, and surprisingly she did. The world didn't end. Our next call, Mom acted as if nothing had happened. This small victory gave me courage to try setting other boundaries. I met Jake during sophomore year in a literature class. He sat next to me on the first day, his laid-back California vibe, a stark contrast to my perpetual nervousness. When he asked me to coffee after class, I spent 20 minutes in the bathroom giving myself a pep talk before joining him. Jake was everything my mother would disapprove of. A film major with artistic ambitions from a boisterous Italian-American family, where emotions were expressed loudly and affectionately. Our study sessions turned into dates, and for the first time I experienced what it felt like to be valued just for being myself. "You flinch when I make suggestions," he observed one night as we edited each other's papers. "Like you're expecting me to yell at you or something." I hadn't realized how visibly my anxiety manifested. Jake's gentle observation opened the door to me sharing bits and pieces about my upbringing. Unlike others who minimized my experiences, "All mothers are critical," or "She just wants what's best for you," Jake listened with growing concern. "That's not normal, Marissa. he said after I recounted how my mother had gone through my diary when I was 14, then punished me for the negative feelings I'd expressed about her. That's actually really messed up. His validation was both comforting and terrifying. If my relationship with my mother wasn't normal, what did that mean for my past? For my future? The first time Jake met my mother was during Parents' Weekend my junior year. I'd been a nervous wreck for weeks leading up to it, cleaning our dorm room repeatedly, coaching Jake on all my mother's triggers, even losing 5 pounds to prevent any comments about my weight. Diane swept in like a hurricane, immediately critiquing everything from the unsafe neighborhood around campus to my haircut. What possessed you to cut it so short? It makes your face look round. She barely acknowledged Jake beyond a perfunctory handshake. After dinner at an expensive restaurant, my father insisted on paying for Diane, cornered me in the restroom. He seems very bohemian, she said, making the word sound like a disease. I thought you were finally growing out of this rebellious phase. It's not a phase, Mom. I'm happy with Jake. Well, don't get too attached. First relationships rarely last. You need someone more ambitious. Later that night, after my parents returned to their hotel, I collapsed into tears in Jake's arms. I'm sorry, I kept repeating. I'm so sorry you had to experience that. Stop apologizing, he said firmly. You're not responsible for her behavior. That night marked a turning point in how I saw my relationship with my mother. Through Jake's eyes, I could see how abnormal her behavior was, how corrosive her criticism. It wasn't that I wasn't good enough. It was that she couldn't or wouldn't see my worth. When I graduated with honors, my mother took full credit in front of our relatives. All those years of pushing her to excel, she told my aunt within my hearing. She wanted to quit so many times, but I wouldn't let her take the easy way out. This was a complete fabrication. I had never wanted to quit. If anything, I'd been driven by an unhealthy perfectionism instilled by her criticism. But in Diane's narrative, my achievements were hers, my personality, a product of her superior parenting. Jake's parents, Maria and Frank, were a revelation. They attended my graduation too, bringing homemade food and genuine enthusiasm. They hugged me warmly and told me how proud they were, not because my success reflected well on them, but simply because they cared about me. The contrast with my own parents was stark and painful. My first job after college was with a marketing firm in Los Angeles. The salary was decent, the work creative and engaging. I called my mother excited to share the news. Marketing. She responded, her disappointment palpable even through the phone. I thought you were going to pursue something more substantial. This sounds very entry level. No congratulations, no excitement. Just another way I'd failed to meet her impossible standards. Jake and I moved in together after dating for 3 years, finding a small but charming apartment in Pasadena. When I told my mother, her response was predictable. Living in sin, she sniffed. What will I tell the neighbors? Tell them your adult daughter is in a committed relationship and happy. I suggested, a new edge in my voice that seemed to surprise us both. With physical distance and growing independence, I began limiting contact with my mother. The daily calls she expected became weekly. I let her voicemails sit unanswered for days. Each small act of independence felt both terrifying and liberating. Jake proposed on our 4th anniversary during a weekend trip to Big Sur. The ring was perfect, a vintage sapphire that had belonged to his grandmother. I was ecstatic, calling my parents immediately after saying yes. Sapphire, my mother said when I described the ring. I always pictured you with a diamond, something traditional. And then, well, I suppose a long engagement makes sense. You've only known each other for 4 years. No congratulations, no happiness for my happiness, just more criticism. Jake's family, in contrast, threw us an impromptu engagement party the following weekend, with homemade Italian food and joyful toasts. His mother, Maria, hugged me and whispered, "You're the daughter I always wanted." I cried, overwhelmed by the simple acceptance I'd craved my entire life. As wedding planning began, I started to understand that the patterns established throughout my childhood would continue to play out in every significant life event, unless I found the courage to change them. The question was whether I could find that courage before my mother's toxicity poisoned what should be the happiest day of my life. Our wedding plans quickly became a battleground. Jake and I wanted something simple and meaningful, a small beach ceremony with close friends and family, followed by a relaxed reception at a local restaurant. We were paying for it ourselves and had a modest budget that reflected our priorities. My mother had other ideas. A beach wedding? In the sand? That's not a real wedding, Marissa, she declared during our first planning conversation. You need a church ceremony and a proper reception. What will people think? They'll think we had the wedding we wanted, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We've already put a deposit on the beach permit. This was met with a dramatic sigh. Well, I suppose if you're determined to embarrass the family, there's nothing I can do. The guilt trips were relentless. Every call included some variation of, I've only dreamed of your wedding day since you were born, or I just want you to have what every girl deserves. What went unspoken was that she wanted me to have the wedding she envisioned regardless of my own desires. When I showed her photos of the simple white sundress I'd chosen, she was horrified. That's not a wedding dress. That's a beach cover-up. She insisted on taking me to bridal salons, where she pulled enormous princess-style gowns with prices that made me wince. You're only getting married once, she said dismissively when I mentioned the cost. Unless you mess it up, of course. These little digs were constant, always undermining my confidence, always implying that without her guidance, I would inevitably fail. The breaking point came during a fitting for one of the elaborate gowns she'd selected. As the seamstress pinned the bodice, my mother frowned critically. We'll need to take it in more at the waist, she instructed, and see if you can do something about the back fat situation. I stared at her reflection in the mirror, tears welling up. There is no back fat situation, Mom. This dress is too small because it's a sample size. Well, she sniffed, perhaps if you'd stuck with that diet, I suggested it would fit properly. I stepped off the pedestal, careful of the pins, and walked to the changing room without a word. As I took off the heavy ornate gown that I'd never wanted in the first place, I made a decision. This had to stop. When I emerged in my own clothes, I was calm but firm. I'm not buying this dress. I'm going with my original choice. And from now on, Jake and I are making the wedding decisions ourselves. Her face flushed with anger. After all I've done for you, this is how you repay me by cutting me out of the most important day of your life. I'm not cutting you out, Mom. I'm just not letting you take over. The ride home was silent and tense. When she dropped me off, she said ominously, Your father will be hearing about this. To my surprise, when Dad called the next day, it wasn't to pressure me into giving in to my mother's demands. Marissa, he said, his voice unusually firm, it's your wedding. Your mother, she gets carried away sometimes. But this day should reflect what you and Jake want. It was the first time I could remember my father directly contradicting my mother's wishes. His small act of support gave me the strength to stand firm as the wedding planning continued. Jake's parents, seeing my stress, made an incredibly generous offer. Let us pay for the wedding, Maria suggested over Sunday dinner at their home. No strings attached, whatever kind of celebration you two want. We couldn't possibly accept that, I protested, though I was touched by the gesture. Consider it our gift, Frank insisted, and this way you don't have to justify every decision to anyone else. The implications were clear. They understood exactly what was happening with my mother and were offering a way out. After discussing it privately, Jake and I gratefully accepted their gift with the agreement that we would still keep the ceremony small and meaningful rather than extravagant. When I told my mother that Jake's parents were now covering the wedding costs, her reaction was explosive. So his family gets to have the wedding they want while your own mother is pushed aside, she cried, tears flowing freely. After all I've sacrificed for you, this is how you repay me, by letting strangers plan your special day. They're not planning it, Mom. Jake and I are. They're just helping financially so we can have the wedding we want without going into debt. The wedding you want, she repeated bitterly. With no consideration for what I want, I might as well not even attend if my opinion means so little. The threat of her not attending was clearly meant to bring me to heel, to make me beg for her approval and participation. In the past, it would have worked. This time, something in me had shifted. That would be your choice, I said quietly. We want you there, but not if you're going to make the day about your feelings rather than our marriage. The shocked silence on the other end of the phone told me she hadn't expected this response. When she spoke again, her voice was cold. I see how it is now. You've changed since you met that boy. The Marissa I raised would never speak to her mother this way." "You're right," I agreed. "I have changed. I've started to understand what healthy relationships look like." The conversation ended shortly after with my mother declaring dramatically that she needed to lie down because I'd given her a migraine. I expected to feel guilty, my default emotion after any confrontation with her, but instead I felt oddly peaceful. Standing up for myself and for the wedding Jake and I wanted felt right even if it was painful. To my surprise, it was my father who stepped in to mediate. He invited Jake and me to dinner without my mother present, something that had never happened before. "Your mother isn't handling this well," he acknowledged as we sat in a quiet corner of a restaurant. "But she does love you, Marissa, in her way." "Her way is hurting me, Dad," I said simply. "It always has." He looked down at his hands, his expression troubled. "I know I haven't always protected you from that. I should have done better." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from him, and it opened the door to an honest conversation about the dynamics in our family. By the end of the meal, Dad had promised to talk to Mom about respecting our wedding choices and to be more present as a buffer between us. To give her credit, my mother did make an effort after that. She still made passive-aggressive comments and sulked when her suggestions were declined, but she stopped trying to completely overhaul our plans. We reached a compromise where she could host a more formal rehearsal dinner, which seemed to satisfy her need for some traditional elements. The wedding planning continued with periodic flare-ups, but nothing as dramatic as the earlier confrontations. We chose our beach venue, selected a menu focused on fresh seafood and local produce, and kept the guest list to 50 close friends and family members. Or so I thought until 3 weeks before the wedding, when I received a confused call from my second cousin Bethany, whom I hadn't seen in years. "I just wanted to confirm the hotel block information," she said. "Mom got the invitation yesterday and we're so excited to come, but the wedding website doesn't mention hotel arrangements." "Invitation," I echoed, puzzled. "Bethany, I'm sorry, but we're having a very small wedding. We didn't send invitations to extended family." The awkward silence told me everything I needed to know before Bethany confirmed it. "Oh, that's weird. Mom got a formal invitation yesterday. It's definitely for your wedding, April 15th at Sunset Beach." After hanging up, I called my mother immediately. "Did you send wedding invitations to people who aren't on our guest list?" I demanded, skipping the usual pleasantries. "I may have included a few additional family members," she admitted, not sounding remotely apologetic. "People who would be hurt if they were excluded." "That wasn't your decision to make, Mom. We're paying for each guest. We chose a venue with limited capacity. You had no right." "Well, I certainly wasn't going to tell my own cousins that they weren't important enough to invite to my only daughter's wedding," she replied defensively. "Family is family." The argument that followed was ugly. I accused her of deliberately sabotaging our plans. She accused me of being selfish and inconsiderate. It ended with me hanging up on her, something I'd never done before. Jake found me crying on our balcony, the stress of months of conflict finally overwhelming me. "Let's just elope," I sobbed into his shoulder. "I can't do this anymore." "Hey," he said gently, lifting my chin to meet his eyes. "This is our day, not hers. We've come this far. Let's not let her win now." The next day, I sent a carefully worded email to the relatives my mother had invited, explaining the situation honestly but diplomatically. Most were understanding, though I'm sure my mother faced some uncomfortable questions the next time she saw them. As the wedding day approached, I focused on the positive. Jake's steadfast support, his wonderful family, who had become mine in all the ways that mattered, and the future we would build together. I made peace with the fact that my relationship with my mother might never be what I had hoped for, but I could still create a fulfilling life and healthy relationships of my own. Our wedding day dawned clear and perfect. The ceremony on the beach was everything we had wanted. Intimate, meaningful, with the sound of waves as our backdrop. Jake's sister played the guitar as I walked across the sand on my father's arm. My mother sat in the front row, outwardly composed, though I could sense her disapproval of the informal proceedings. During the reception, she managed to maintain a gracious facade, though she couldn't resist the opportunity during her toast to rewrite history a bit. "I always knew my Marissa would make a beautiful bride," she said, raising her glass. From the moment she was born, I've devoted myself to raising her to be the accomplished, wonderful woman you see today. All those nights helping with homework, all those weekends driving to volleyball tournaments, all those college applications I helped perfect. It was all for this moment, seeing her so happy. Jake's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently in silent support. We both knew the reality behind her carefully constructed narrative, but this wasn't the time or place to challenge it. I had made my peace with the fact that my mother would always see my life through the distorted lens of her own need for control and recognition. As Jake and I drove away from the reception toward our honeymoon, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. I had stood my ground, had the wedding we wanted, and emerged relatively unscathed. It felt like a victory, small but significant. I didn't know then that the real battle for boundaries with my mother was still to come. 5 years into our marriage, Jake and I had established a good life together. We bought a small but charming craftsman home in a family-friendly neighborhood, advanced in our careers. Jake now working as a cinematographer for independent films, me having been promoted to marketing director at a sustainable products company, and had settled into routines that worked for us. My relationship with my mother had reached a kind of detente. We spoke weekly on scheduled calls, visited for major holidays, and maintained a surface-level pleasantness that rarely delved below the safe topics of weather and neighborhood gossip. It wasn't close, but it was manageable. Beneath this carefully maintained truce, however, the old patterns persisted. Every visit to my parents' home included pointed comments about our house. "It's cozy, isn't it?" My cooking, a little bland for my taste, or my career choices. "Marketing is fine if you're not ambitious enough for management." Jake noticed how I reverted to my childhood self around my mother, quieter, more anxious, constantly seeking approval that never came. "You're different when she's around," he observed after one particularly tense Thanksgiving visit. "Like you shrink." He was right. Despite years of therapy and the confidence I'd built in other areas of my life, my mother still had the power to make me feel small with just a few carefully chosen words. The real conflict, however, began when Jake and I started trying for a baby. After a year without success, we sought medical advice and discovered that I had endometriosis, which was complicating our efforts to conceive. The diagnosis led to surgery, followed by fertility treatments that were physically grueling and emotionally draining. My mother's response to our struggles was typically tone-deaf. "Well, you did wait rather long to start trying," she commented when I finally shared our difficulties with her. "I had you at 24, you know. Bodies aren't designed to have babies in your 30s." The criticism stung particularly sharply, given the hormone treatments that were making me emotional, and the deep sense of failure I already felt about my body's inability to do what seemed to come easily to others. "Actually, Mom, lots of women have healthy pregnancies in their 30s, I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Our doctor isn't concerned about my age." "Doctors will tell you what you want to hear," she dismissed. "I'm just being realistic." The pressure intensified with each family gathering. Any news she would ask pointedly often, in front of others, forcing me to shake my head and endure the pitying looks. When my cousin announced her pregnancy at a family dinner, my mother leaned over to whisper, "She's 5 years younger than you, you know. Didn't wait too long." After our second miscarriage, a devastating loss at 11 weeks that left me emotionally shattered, my mother's response was to suggest that perhaps we weren't meant to be parents and should accept God's plan. She followed this with stories about friends whose children had caused them nothing but heartache, as if this was supposed to be comforting. It was Jake who finally convinced me to be more assertive about boundaries with my mother. "You're hurting," he said gently after I hung up from yet another difficult call. "And she's making it worse. You don't have to keep subjecting yourself to that." With my therapist's help, I drafted a clear email to both my parents explaining that while I appreciated their concern, comments about our fertility journey were off limits unless we specifically brought up the topic. I emphasized that this was a painful and private matter for us, and that unsolicited advice or comments were not helpful. My father responded with a brief but supportive message. "We understand, we love you, and are here when you need us." My mother predictably took offense. "I'm just trying to help," she replied. "I don't understand why you're being so sensitive about normal questions. This is what mothers and daughters talk about." The next time she brought up the topic during a phone call, I was prepared. "Mom, I've asked you not to discuss this unless I bring it up. If you continue, I'm going to have to end this call. Don't be ridiculous, she scoffed. I'm your mother. I have a right to know what's happening in your life. I'm hanging up now, I said calmly. I'll talk to you next week, and hopefully we can find other topics to discuss. I ended the call despite her protests, then sat shaking on the couch, equal parts proud of myself for enforcing the boundary and terrified of the fallout. Sure enough, my father called an hour later. Your mother is very upset. He began, his tone weary. She was only expressing interest in your life. Dad, we've been clear about this boundary. It's not about her feelings. It's about protecting mine during a really difficult time. There was a long pause before he sighed. I understand. More than you might think. I'll talk to her. This pattern, boundary setting, violation, enforcement, fallout, became the new normal in our relationship. My mother would push, I would hold firm, she would react with hurt and anger. My father would try to mediate, and we would eventually resettle into an uneasy peace until the next boundary was tested. As difficult as this cycle was, it represented progress. I was no longer automatically yielding to her demands or absorbing her criticism without response. I was standing up for myself even when it was uncomfortable. My therapist called this growing pains in our relationship, necessary discomfort as we established a healthier dynamic. My mother's health became another lever of control. She began having heart palpitations that she attributed directly to the stress I was causing her by pulling away from the family. When my father called to tell me about her visit to the emergency room, which turned out to be anxiety, not a heart attack, the subtext was clear. My boundary setting was making my mother ill. I felt the familiar guilt rising, but reminded myself of what my therapist had repeatedly emphasized. I was not responsible for my mother's emotional reactions or health issues. Her anxiety was not caused by my reasonable boundaries, but by her own inability to respect them. The extended family dynamics began shifting as well. My mother had always been the unchallenged matriarch, the one who organized gatherings and dictated family narratives. As I became more assertive, other family members, particularly my cousins and younger aunts, began sharing their own experiences of her controlling behavior. She's always been like that, my Aunt Susan confided during a rare moment alone at a family barbecue. Even when we were kids, Diana had to be the perfect one, and the rest of us were never quite good enough. I'm glad you're standing up to her. It's about time someone did. These quiet validations from other family members strengthened my resolve. I wasn't crazy or oversensitive. I was responding to real and problematic behavior that others had recognized but rarely confronted. The Thanksgiving before my cousin Emma's wedding marked another significant confrontation. My mother had been particularly critical that day, commenting on everything from my weight, "Are you sure you should have seconds?" to our decision to bring a store-bought pie rather than homemade. I suppose not everyone has time to cook properly. After dinner, when she started in on our continued childlessness, suggesting that perhaps I was too focused on my career to make a family a priority, I calmly stood up from the table. "We're leaving," I announced, looking to Jake, who immediately stood as well. "Mom, we've discussed this boundary repeatedly. I'm not going to keep subjecting myself to these comments." "You're overreacting," she protested as we gathered our things. "This is what families do. They talk about important life issues." "No, this is what you do," I corrected her. "You criticize and judge and push until people give in to avoid the conflict." I'm done giving in. We left despite her tears and my father's pleas to reconsider. In the car, instead of the guilt I expected to feel, I experienced an overwhelming sense of relief. Standing up for myself was becoming easier with practice, and the emotional toll of enforcing boundaries was less than the cost of allowing them to be violated. The incident created a rift that lasted through Christmas, which we spent with Jake's family instead of mine. My mother sent stiffly formal texts but didn't call. My father maintained contact, his messages a mixture of apology and gentle pressure to reconcile. By the time my cousin Emma's wedding approached in April, we had resumed limited contact, though the underlying issues remained unresolved. I was anxious about seeing my mother at the wedding, but determined to maintain appropriate boundaries while being civil. What I couldn't have anticipated was that this family gathering would become the breaking point in our already strained relationship. Emma's wedding was held at the Fairmont Hotel, an elegant venue that even my mother couldn't find fault with. Jake and I arrived early to help with some last-minute arrangements. Emma had always been one of my favorite cousins, and I was honored to be included in her special day. "You look beautiful," Jake said as we entered the hotel lobby. I was wearing a deep green dress that complemented my dark hair and eyes, something I'd chosen carefully to avoid potential criticism from my mother. Old habits die hard even when you're actively working to break them. "Thanks," I smiled, squeezing his hand. "Let's just try to enjoy today. Okay? No drama." "No drama," he agreed, though we both knew that with my mother, that was more aspiration than expectation. The ceremony was lovely, Emma radiant, as she exchanged vows with her partner Alex. I sat with Jake several rows behind my parents, deliberately choosing a bit of distance. My mother looked elegant as always in a navy blue ensemble that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. She maintained her composure throughout the ceremony, though I caught her discreetly dabbing at her eyes during the vows, a rare display of emotion. At the reception, we were seated at different tables, another small mercy. Jake and I were placed with my cousins and their partners, while my parents joined the table with Emma's parents and other aunts and uncles. For the first hour, everything proceeded smoothly. The food was excellent, the speeches heartfelt, the atmosphere celebratory. I was relaxed enough to actually enjoy myself laughing with my cousins and dancing with Jake during the first set of music. During a break in the dancing, I stepped outside to the hotel's garden terrace for some fresh air. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's younger sister and always my favorite relative, joined me there. "How are you holding up?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. Patricia was one of the few family members who fully understood the complexity of my relationship with my mother, having grown up with Diana's perfectionism herself. "I'm good, actually," I replied honestly. "It's nice to just enjoy a family event without feeling like I'm walking on eggshells." Patricia nodded understandingly. "You know, I've always admired how you've handled Diana. She's not an easy person to have as a mother." "Or as a sister, I imagine," I said with a small smile. "God, no." Patricia laughed. "But at least I could escape to my own home. You had to live with her." Our conversation drifted to more pleasant topics. Patricia's recent retirement, her plans for travel, her grandchildren. And then, almost as an afterthought, I shared my own news. "Actually, I have something exciting to tell you," I said, lowering my voice, though we were alone on the terrace. "I'm pregnant again. Almost 12 weeks now." After 2 miscarriages and years of trying, Jake and I had been cautiously optimistic about this pregnancy. The 12-week mark was significant. We'd lost our previous pregnancies earlier, and this milestone meant the risk was substantially lower. We'd planned to start telling family after my next doctor's appointment, but in the moment, sharing with Patricia felt right. Her face lit up with genuine joy. "Oh, Marissa, that's wonderful news. How are you feeling?" "Terrified but hopeful," I admitted. "The doctor says everything looks good this time. Strong heartbeat, normal development. We're starting to let ourselves believe it might actually happen." "I'm so happy for you," Patricia said, hugging me tightly. "You're going to be an amazing mother." What neither of us realized was that my mother had come looking for Patricia and was standing just inside the doorway, hearing every word of our conversation. I only became aware of her presence when she stepped onto the terrace, her face a mask of controlled fury. "So everyone gets to know about my grandchild before me," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "My own sister." "Were you planning to tell me at all, Marissa?" My heart sank. This wasn't how I'd wanted her to find out, but her reaction immediately confirmed why I'd been hesitant to share the news with her in the first place. "Mom, we were going to tell everyone after my appointment next week," I explained, trying to keep my voice calm. "We've been cautious because of the previous miscarriages." "Cautious?" she repeated incredulously. "Is that what you call excluding your own mother from important family news while sharing it with others?" "Diana, be reasonable," Patricia interjected. "She just told me this minute. It wasn't some conspiracy." But my mother was beyond reason, her feelings of exclusion overriding any consideration for the context or my feelings. As other wedding guests began filtering onto the terrace, attracted by the rising voices, she became more agitated rather than moderating her tone. "First, The wedding, then the house, now this, she said bitterly. Always pushing me aside, always treating me like I don't matter. That's not true, Mom, I said, acutely aware of the audience we were attracting. Can we please discuss this privately? This is Emma's wedding. We shouldn't create a scene. Oh, now you're concerned about propriety. She laughed harshly. When you've been lying to me for months, I'm your mother. I have a right to know these things first. Jake appeared at my side, having noticed the confrontation from inside. Mrs. Anderson, he said quietly, maybe we could continue this conversation somewhere more private. My mother turned on him, then her eyes flashing with a fury I recognized from childhood confrontations. Don't you dare try to manage me. You've been turning her against me from the beginning, filling her head with nonsense about boundaries and distance. Mom, stop, I pleaded, mortified by the spectacle we were creating at my cousin's wedding. Guests were openly staring, now conversations halted, the joyful atmosphere evaporating. No, you stop, she hissed, her voice rising despite the setting. Stop treating me like I'm some toxic presence you need to protect yourself from. After everything I've sacrificed for you, everything I've done to give you a good life, this is how you repay me, with secrets and lies. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest that preceded a panic attack, my breath becoming shallow. Jake's arm around my waist steadied me as my mother continued her tirade, seemingly oblivious to the inappropriate public setting. You've always been ungrateful, she said, each word precise and cutting. Always thinking you know better, always judging me. Do you have any idea how hard it was to raise you? How many opportunities I gave up? How many sacrifices I made? I'd heard variations of this speech my entire life, the martyr narrative that cast her as the selfless mother and me as the ungrateful daughter. Usually I absorbed it in silence, accepting the guilt she so expertly deployed. But something about this moment, the public humiliation, the joy of my pregnancy being twisted into another weapon, the ruining of Emma's special day, broke something fundamental inside me. Mom, I said quietly, finding a strange calm in the eye of the emotional storm. This isn't the time or place. Don't tell me when I can express my feelings. She nearly shouted, her careful public persona completely abandoned. I'm your mother. You wouldn't even exist without me. And then came the words that would change everything between us forever. My life is cursed to have birthed you, she shouted, her voice echoing across the now silent terrace. Everything I've done for you, and this is what I get in return. The shocked gasps from the assembled guests barely registered as I stared at my mother, seeing with perfect clarity the toxic dynamic that had shaped my entire life. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of freedom, as if her public cruelty had finally released me from any obligation to protect her feelings or reputation. I'm expecting a child of my own now, I said, my voice steady and clear, despite the tears streaming down my face. And I will never make them feel the way you've made me feel my entire life. Your grandchild will never know you unless you get help. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's face froze in shock, as if she couldn't believe I'd actually responded to her public attack, instead of absorbing it as I always had before. My father, who had appeared at the edge of the crowd, looked stricken. Jake's arm tightened around me in silent support. We're leaving, I said quietly to Jake, who nodded immediately. As we made our way through the stunned crowd, Emma caught my eye. I'm so sorry, I mouthed, devastated that my family drama had disrupted her wedding. To my surprise, she reached out and squeezed my hand as we passed. Go, she whispered. It's okay. We left the hotel without looking back, the weight of 32 years of emotional abuse suddenly lifting from my shoulders, replaced by the terrifying but exhilarating certainty that things could never go back to the way they were, and that was exactly as it should be. Jake drove us home in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other holding mine tightly. I was still in a state of shock, replaying the confrontation at the wedding over and over in my mind. My mother's words, "My life is cursed to have birthed you," echoed painfully but strangely. They no longer had the power to destroy me. Instead, they had crystallized exactly what I needed to do. Are you okay? Jake finally asked as we pulled into our driveway. Not really, I admitted, but I think I will be. Inside our home, I kicked off my heels and sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. Jake brought me a glass of water and sat beside me, his presence steady and comforting as it had always been. What happens now? He asked gently. I took a deep breath, my hand instinctively moving to my still flat stomach where our child was growing. I think I need to cut contact. Completely, at least for now. The decision, which would have seemed unthinkable just hours before now, felt inevitable and right. The public humiliation at the wedding had been the culmination of a lifetime of criticism, control, and emotional manipulation. I couldn't expose my child to that toxicity, couldn't risk them growing up thinking that kind of relationship was normal or acceptable. I'll support whatever you decide, Jake said, his eyes reflecting both concern and relief. You know that. My phone had been buzzing continuously since we left the wedding. I finally looked at it to find dozens of messages. From my father, from Patricia, from cousins, even from Emma herself. None from my mother, tellingly. Patricia's text was simple. I'm so proud of you. Call me when you're ready. Emma's brought tears to my eyes. Don't you dare feel bad about what happened. Your mom was way out of line. You said what needed to be said. Love you. My father's messages were more complicated. A mixture of apologies, pleas for understanding, and subtle attempts to make me responsible for managing my mother's feelings again. Your mother is devastated. She didn't mean what she said. Please call us. We need to talk about this as a family. I turned off my phone without responding to any of them. Tomorrow would be soon enough to sort through the aftermath. Tonight, I needed to process what had happened and what it meant for my future and my child's future. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't expected. While the hurt of my mother's public rejection was still raw, the relief of finally standing up to her outweighed the pain. I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying my entire life. Jake made breakfast while I finally checked my messages. The outpouring of support from extended family members was overwhelming. Cousins I rarely spoke to had texted their solidarity. Aunts and uncles expressed shock at my mother's behavior and support for my response. It seemed that the public nature of our confrontation had finally made visible to everyone what had been happening behind closed doors for decades. My father had called 7 times overnight. When I finally returned his call, his voice was heavy with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Regret, perhaps, or resignation. Marissa, he began, your mother didn't mean what she said. She was upset about finding out about the pregnancy that way. It was the same pattern that had played out my entire life. My mother's behavior excused her feelings, centered her responsibility, erased. Dad, I interrupted gently. She meant exactly what she said. She's shown me how she feels about me my entire life. The only difference is that this time she said it out loud in public where others could hear it. She loves you, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. She just doesn't know how to show it properly. I'm 32 years old, Dad. If she hasn't learned how to show love properly by now, it's because she doesn't want to. There was a long silence before he spoke again, his voice breaking slightly. I've failed you. I should have protected you from her difficulties. I just thought it was easier to keep the peace. His admission, the first real acknowledgement of his role in enabling my mother's behavior, caught me off guard. Yes, I agreed softly. You should have. But you can't change the past. What matters is what happens now. What do you want to happen? He asked, sounding genuinely uncertain. I need space from Mom. Complete space. No calls, no visits, no messages relayed through you. I'm pregnant, Dad. I need to focus on staying healthy and creating a safe, loving environment for my baby. I can't do that while dealing with Mom's toxicity. I expected resistance pleas for reconciliation, the usual pressure to forgive and forget for the sake of family harmony. Instead, he surprised me. I understand, he said quietly. And I think you're right. Diana, she needs help. Professional help. I've been suggesting it for years, but after yesterday, I'm going to insist on it. What she said to you, how she behaved, it wasn't right. I see that now. The validation from my father, who had spent decades avoiding conflict at all costs, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you for saying that," I managed. "Can I still call you?" he asked hesitantly. "Separate from your mother, I mean. I want to know how you're doing, how the pregnancy progresses. I want to be a grandfather to your child even if things with your mother don't improve." "I'd like that," I admitted. "But you have to respect my boundaries about Mom. No pressure to reconcile, no guilt trips, no using your relationship with me to try to fix things with her." "I promise," he said, and for the first time in my life, I believed my father might actually keep his word about standing up to my mother. Over the next few days, I changed my phone number, blocked my mother on all social media, and asked trusted family members not to share information about me with her. It felt extreme, but also necessary. A clean break to allow myself to heal from decades of emotional abuse. The weeks that followed were both difficult and liberating. I experienced waves of grief for the mother-daughter relationship I had always wanted, but never had. I worried about my father still living with my mother's volatility. I felt guilt when well-meaning friends asked about my parents' excitement about becoming grandparents. But alongside these challenging emotions, I discovered a profound sense of peace. Without the constant criticism and judgment from my mother, I found myself more relaxed, more confident, more present in my own life. My pregnancy progressed smoothly. The anxiety that had characterized my previous pregnancies noticeably diminished. Patricia became an unexpected source of support during this time. As my mother's sister, she understood better than most the dynamics at play. "Diana has always been troubled," she told me during one of our regular lunch dates. "Even as children, there was something missing in how she related to others. Everything was about her, her feelings, her needs. But understanding that doesn't mean you have to accept the behavior." Jake's family embraced my pregnancy with uncomplicated joy. His mother Maria came to doctor's appointments when Jake couldn't make them help set up the nursery, and never once made me feel inadequate or unprepared for motherhood. "You're going to be a wonderful mother," she assured me. "You know exactly what not to do." My father kept his promise, calling regularly, but never pressuring me about reconciliation. Through him, I learned that my mother had reluctantly started therapy, though he was realistic about the likelihood of significant change. "She's going through the motions," he admitted, "but I don't think she really believes she needs to change." 3 months after the wedding confrontation, I received a letter from my mother. My hands trembled as I opened it, uncertain what to expect. The 3-page handwritten note was classic Diana, beautifully penned, formally phrased, and utterly lacking in genuine accountability. "I regret that my words caused you distress," she wrote, carefully avoiding a direct apology. "However, you must understand the hurt I felt at being excluded from news of my grandchild." The letter went on to enumerate her sacrifices as a mother, the ways in which I had supposedly failed to appreciate her, and her expectation that I would come to my senses soon. There was no acknowledgement of the lifetime of criticism and control that had led to our breaking point, no recognition of her role in damaging our relationship. It was, in essence, more of the same behavior that had driven me away, just in written form. I didn't respond to the letter. Instead, I placed it in a box with other mementos of my relationship with my mother: birthday cards with backhanded compliments, photographs where her smile never quite reached her eyes, notes with pointed suggestions for improvement. Someday I thought I might share these with my child as part of explaining why their grandmother wasn't in our lives. But for now, I closed the box and focused on the future. Lily Grace was born on a bright October morning after a surprisingly straightforward labor. As I held my daughter for the first time, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, I made a silent promise. "You will always know you are loved exactly as you are. Your worth will never be tied to your achievements or appearance. You will never question whether you are enough." Jake's parents arrived at the hospital with flowers and tears of joy. My father came separately, his eyes filling as he held his granddaughter for the first time. "She's perfect," he whispered, and I knew he was thinking of my mother's absence, of the choices that had led to this moment. "Would you like to take a picture to show Mom?" I asked, testing the boundaries I'd established. He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, this is your moment, your family. Diana will need to earn the right to be part of it." His response confirmed what I had slowly come to realize over the months of separation. My father was finally truly seeing the dysfunction that had characterized our family for decades. He was choosing at long last to stop enabling it. The first year of Lily's life was a revelation. Without my mother's critical voice in my ear, I found motherhood challenging but joyful. When I felt uncertain, I had healthy resources to turn to. Books, my pediatrician's supportive mom friends, and Jake's mother, who offered advice only when asked, and always with the caveat, "But you know your baby best." As Lily grew from newborn to infant to toddler, I watched vigilantly for any signs that I was repeating my mother's patterns. Did I get frustrated too easily? Did I expect too much from a child just learning about the world? Was I unconsciously transferring my own unfulfilled desires onto my daughter? My therapist assured me that this awareness alone made me different from my mother. "The fact that you're asking these questions, that you're conscious of these patterns, means you're already breaking the cycle," she told me. "Perfect parents don't exist. Good enough parents who love their children, recognize their mistakes, and try to do better absolutely do." By Lily's third birthday, I had established a new understanding of family, one based on mutual respect, genuine love, and healthy boundaries. My father visited regularly, delighting in his role as grandfather. Jake's parents were a constant loving presence. Extended family members who had witnessed the wedding confrontation had for the most part respected my boundaries and supported my decision to distance myself from my mother. Diana herself had made several attempts to re-enter my life, each following the same pattern. Initial contrition quickly giving way to demands and criticism, when I didn't immediately welcome her back on her terms. Each attempt reinforced my conviction that the distance between us was necessary and right. When I finally agreed to a carefully supervised visit when Lily was 3, it was with clear conditions. The visit would be brief in a neutral location, with Jake present at all times. My mother agreed to these terms with obvious reluctance. The meeting at a local park was strained, but civil. Diana had brought an extravagant gift for Lily, who regarded her grandmother with the natural wariness children often show toward unfamiliar adults. When Lily refused to sit on her lap for a photo, I saw the flash of annoyance cross my mother's face, the same expression that had preceded so many cutting remarks throughout my childhood. But instead of the criticism I expected, she visibly caught herself. "That's okay," she said with obvious effort. "Maybe next time when we know each other better." It was a small moment, but significant. Perhaps the first time I'd ever seen my mother adjust her expectations to accommodate someone else's feelings, rather than demanding that they accommodate hers. It wasn't enough to erase decades of damage, but it was a glimmer of what might be possible with continued therapy and boundaries. As we left the park after that brief visit, Lily skipping between Jake and me, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. Standing up to my mother at Emma's wedding had been the hardest and best thing I'd ever done. It had cost me the fantasy of having a loving, supportive mother, but it had given me something far more valuable, the freedom to become the mother I wanted to be, the mother my daughter deserved. The words I had spoken in that moment of clarity, "I will never make them feel the way you've made me feel my entire life," had become my guiding principle as a parent. Not perfect, not without mistakes, but fundamentally different from what I had experienced growing up. The cycle of emotional abuse that had defined generations of women in my family had finally definitively been broken, and in its place, something new and healthy was growing. A family built on love rather than fear, acceptance rather than criticism, truth rather than appearance. 3 years have passed since that first supervised visit with my mother. Lily is now 6, a bright, confident first grader, with her father's creative spirit and a stubborn streak that I admit probably comes from me. We've welcomed another child too, Samuel, now 2, a cheerful toddler, who brings chaos and joy in equal measure to our expanded home. My relationship with my mother remains complex and limited. After multiple attempts at reconciliation that quickly devolved into the same old patterns we've established, what my therapist calls structured contact, brief, infrequent visits in neutral locations, always with clear beginnings and endings, always with Jake or another support person present. Diana complains about these restrictions, but she complies with them because she knows the alternative is no contact at all. She has continued therapy, and there have been moments of genuine growth, times when she's caught herself before making a critical comment, occasions when she's actually apologized for overstepping. They are small victories in the context of a lifetime of toxic behavior, but they represent more change than I ever thought possible. My father has undergone his own transformation. At 68, he has developed an independence I never saw during my childhood. He visits us regularly. Without, my mother has rekindled old friendships she had discouraged and even started volunteering at a local literacy program, something she had dismissed as a waste of time when he first mentioned it years ago. I wish I had found this courage earlier, he told me during a recent visit watching Lily show him her latest art project. I might have saved you from so much hurt. You can't change the past, Dad, I reminded him, echoing our conversation after the wedding confrontation. But you're here now, and that matters. The extended family dynamics have shifted as well. My mother's carefully constructed image as the perfect matriarch has crumbled, allowing more authentic relationships to develop throughout the family. Cousins who once kept their distance, intimidated by Diana's judgments, now visit regularly. Aunts and uncles who witnessed the wedding confrontation have shared their own stories of Diana's controlling behavior over the years. Emma, whose wedding had been the setting for our final breakdown, has become one of my closest confidants. In a weird way, I'm glad it happened at my wedding, she told me recently. It was like this family secret finally got dragged into the light, where everyone had to acknowledge it. Motherhood has given me a new perspective on my own upbringing. Every day I make conscious choices about how to respond to my children's needs and behaviors. When Lily spills her juice or Samuel has a tantrum, I feel the momentary flash of irritation that I imagine all parents feel, but I don't allow it to become the criticism and cold withdrawal that characterize my mother's parenting. Instead, I take a breath, remember that they are still learning, still developing, and respond with the patience and love I wish I had received. It isn't always easy. There are days when I'm tired or stressed when my responses aren't as measured as I'd like them to be. But the difference is that I recognize these moments, apologize when necessary, and recommit to doing better. You're not your mother, Jake reminds me on the hard days when I worry that I might be carrying forward patterns I've worked so hard to break. The fact that you worry about it proves that. My therapy has continued shifting focus from surviving my mother's abuse to thriving as a parent, determined to break generational patterns. The tools I've developed, recognizing triggers, setting healthy boundaries, validating emotions, serve me well both in managing my limited contact with Diana and in raising children who feel secure in their worth. I've also found purpose in sharing my experience with others. Through a support group for adult children of emotionally abusive parents, I've connected with people who understand the complex grief of mourning a relationship with someone who is still alive but toxic. Some have chosen complete estrangement, others limited contact like mine. All are engaged in the difficult work of redefining family on healthier terms. How do you know when it's time to cut contact? A new group member asked recently, her voice trembling with the weight of the decision. When the pain of staying connected outweighs the pain of letting go. I answered thinking of that moment at Emma's wedding when my mother's words, "My life is cursed to have birthed you," had finally severed something essential between us. When you realize that you're sacrificing your well-being and potentially your children's well-being to maintain a relationship that brings more harm than good. It wasn't an easy answer, and not everyone's journey looks like mine. Some find healing through confrontation and ongoing dialogue. Others, like me, need distance, temporary or permanent, to break free from toxic patterns and reclaim their sense of self-worth. Last month, my mother asked to attend Lily's school play. It was the first time she had expressed interest in an event that was important to Lily, rather than just requesting a visit on her own terms. After discussing it with Jake and my therapist, I agreed with the usual boundaries in place. Watching my mother sit in the audience as Lily performed her small role as a tree in the forest, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness for what might have been if Diana had been capable of the unconditional love children deserve. Grief for the mother-daughter relationship I had always wanted. Pride in the boundaries I had established to protect myself and my children. And a quiet hope that perhaps with continued effort on her part, some new type of relationship might eventually be possible. After the performance, Diana approached Lily with uncharacteristic hesitation. "You were a wonderful tree," she said, without the criticism or comparison I had braced myself for. "The best tree in the whole forest." Lily, who has no memory of the toxic patterns that defined my childhood, beamed at this simple praise. "Thanks, Grandma Diana, I practiced my swaying a lot." It was a small moment, but meaningful. A glimpse of what healthy grandparenting could look like if my mother continues her difficult work of change. Later that night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Why doesn't Grandma Diana come over like Grandma Maria and Grandpa Frank do?" I had prepared for this question, knowing it would come eventually. "Grandma Diana and I have a complicated relationship," I explained carefully. "Sometimes people need extra space and special rules to have a healthy relationship." Lily considered this seriously. "Like how I need space from Zoe at recess sometimes because she always wants to be the leader. Something like that." I smiled, amazed at her ability to find a relevant parallel in her 6-year-old world. Everyone deserves to be treated with kindness and respect. When someone has trouble with that, we need to set boundaries to keep ourselves safe and happy. "I'm glad you're my mom," she said sleepily, cuddling her favorite stuffed rabbit. "You're the best mom ever." "I'm glad you're my daughter," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "You're perfect, exactly as you are." As I turned out her light, I reflected on how far I had come from that moment at Emma's wedding, when I had finally found the courage to stand up to a lifetime of emotional abuse. The words I had spoken then, "I will never make them feel the way you've made me feel my entire life," had become not just a boundary with my mother, but a promise to my children. It wasn't always easy. Breaking generational patterns of abuse requires constant vigilance, ongoing work, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths about family dynamics. But watching my children grow with the security and confidence I never had as a child makes every difficult conversation, every painful memory confronted, every boundary enforced, absolutely worth it. The journey from victim to survivor to thriver isn't linear or perfect. There are still days when my mother's voice echoes in my head, when old insecurities resurface, when I question my worth or my decisions. But those voices grow fainter with time, replaced by the evidence of the healthy, loving family Jake and I have created together. Standing up to my mother that day was the hardest thing I've ever done. It cost me the fantasy of having the mother I always wanted, but it gave me something far more valuable: the freedom to become the mother my children deserve, and in the process, to finally become the person I was always meant to be. If you're watching this and struggling with toxic family relationships, please know that you're not alone. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? Did you ever have to walk away from someone who was supposed to love you unconditionally? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might help someone else feel less alone in their journey. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about breaking generational patterns and building healthier relationships. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to prioritize their well-being, even when it means stepping away from toxic family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, especially by those who claim to love you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what hurts you, especially when it's family.